So here's me reading from Terrence Deacon's Incomplete Nature, How Mind Emerged from Matter. Excerpts on the concept of meaning. Chapter 1, Absence. Page 2. Obviously, despite this something not present that characterizes the contents of my thoughts and the meanings of these words, I wrote them because of the meanings that they might convey. And this is presumably why you are focusing your eyes on them, and what might prompt you to expend a bit of mental effort to make sense of them. In other words, the content of this or any sentence, a something that is not a thing, has physical consequences, but how? Meaning isn't the only thing that presents a problem of this sort. Several other everyday relationships share this problematic feature as well. The function of a shovel isn't the shovel and isn't the hole in the ground, but rather the potential it affords for making holes easy to create. The reference of the wave of a hand in greeting is not the hand movement, nor the physical convergence of friends, but the initiation of a possible sharing of thoughts and remembered experiences. The purpose of my writing this book is not the tapping of computer keys, nor the deposit of ink on paper, nor even the production and distribution of a great many replicas of a physical book, but to share something that isn't embodied by any of these physical processes and objects, ideas. And curiously, it is precisely because these ideas lack these physical attributes that they can be shared with tens of thousands of readers without ever being depleted. Even more enigmatically, ascertaining the value of this enterprise is nearly impossible to link with any specific physical consequence. It is something almost entirely virtual, maybe nothing more than making certain ideas easier to conceive, or, if my suspicions prove correct, increasing one's sense of belonging in the universe. Page 7. As the philosopher David Chalmers sees it, for any physical process we specify, there will be an unanswered question. Why should this process give rise to experience? Given any such process, it is conceptually coherent that it could be instantiated in the absence of experience. It follows that no mere account of the physical process will tell us why experience arises. The emergence of experience goes beyond what can be derived from physical theory. What could it mean that consciousness cannot be derived from any physical theory? Chalmers argues that we just need to face up to the fact that consciousness is non-physical and yet also not transcendental, in the sense of an ephemeral eternal soul. As one option, Chalmers champions the view that consciousness may be a property of the world that is fundamental to the universe as electrical charge or gravitational mass. He is willing to entertain this possibility because he believes that there is no way to reduce experiential qualities to physical processes. Consciousness is always a residual phenomenon remaining unaccounted for after all correlated physical processes are described. So, for example, although we can explain how a device might be built to distinguish red light from green light, and can even explain how retinal cells accomplish this, this account provides no purchase in explaining why red light looks red. But does accepting this anti-materialist claim about consciousness require that there must be fundamental physical properties yet to be discovered? In this book, I advocate a less dramatic, though perhaps more counterintuitive approach. It's not that the difficulty of locating consciousness among the neural signaling forces us to look for it in something else, that is, in some sort of special substrate or ineffable ether or extra-physical realm. The anti-materialist claim is compatible with another, quite materially grounded approach. Like meanings and purposes, consciousness may not be something there in any typical sense of being materially or energetically embodied, and yet may still be materially causally relevant. Page 8. Conscious experience confronts us with a variant of the same problem that we face with respect to function, meaning, or value. None of these phenomena are materially present either, and yet they matter, so to speak. In each of these cases, there is something present that marks this curious intrinsic relation to something absent. In the case of consciousness, what is present is an awake, functioning brain, buzzing with trillions of signaling processes each second. But there is an additional issue with consciousness that makes it particularly insistent, in a way that these other absential relations aren't. That which is explicitly absence is me. Calculating with absence. The difficulty we face when dealing with absences that matter has a striking historical parallel: the problems posed by the concept of zero. As the epigraph for this chapter proclaims, one of the greatest advances in the history of mathematics was the discovery of zero. A symbol designating the lack of quantity was not merely important because of the convenience it offered for notating large quantities. It transformed the very concept of number and revolutionized the process of calculation. In many ways, the discovery of the usefulness of zero marks the dawn of modern mathematics. But as many historians have noted, zero was at times feared, banned, shunned, and worshipped during the millennia-long history that preceded its acceptance in the West. Page 9 and 10. In many respects, zero can be thought of as the midwife of modern science. Until Western scholars were able to make sense of the systematic properties of this non-quantity, understanding many of the most common properties of the physical world remained beyond their reach. What zero shares in common with living and mental phenomena is that these natural processes also each owe their most fundamental character to what is specifically not present. They are also, in effect, the physical tokens of this absence. Functions and meanings are explicitly entangled with something that is not intrinsic to the artifacts or signs that constitute them. Experiences and values seem to inhere in physical relationships, but are not there at the same time. This something not there permeates and organizes what is physically present in these phenomena. Its absent mode of existence, so to speak, is at most only a potentiality, a placeholder. It marks the columnar position where the quantities 1 through 9 can potentially be inserted in the recursive pattern that is our common decimal notation, e.g. the tens, hundreds, thousands columns. But it itself does not signify a quantity. Analogously, the hemoglobin molecules in my blood are also placeholders for something they are not: oxygen. Hemoglobin is exquisitely shaped in the negative image of this molecule's properties, like a mould in clay, and at the same time reflects the demands of the living system that gives rise to it. It only holds the oxygen molecule tightly enough to carry it through the circulation, where it gives it up to other tissues. It exists and exhibits these properties because it mediates a relationship between oxygen and the metabolism of an animal body. Similarly, a written word is also a placeholder. It is appointed to a space in a network of meanings, each also pointing to one another and to potential features of the world. But a meaning is something virtual and potential. Though a meaning is more familiar to us than a hemoglobin molecule, the scientific account of concepts like function and meaning essentially lags centuries behind the sciences of these more tangible phenomena. We are, in this respect, a bit like our medieval forebears, who were quite familiar with the concepts of absence, emptiness, and so on, but could not imagine how the representation of absence could be incorporated into operations involving the quantities of things present. We take meanings and purposes for granted in our everyday lives, and yet we have been unable to incorporate these into the framework of the natural sciences. We seem only willing to admit that which is materially present into the sciences of things living and mental. For medieval mathematicians, zero was the devil's number. The unnatural way it behaved with respect to other numbers when incorporated into calculations suggested that it could be dangerous. Even today, school children are warned of the dangers of dividing by zero. Do this and you can show that 1 equals 2 or that all numbers are equal. In contemporary neuroscience, molecular biology, and dynamical systems theory approaches to life and mind, there is an analogous assumption about concepts like representation and purposiveness. Many of the most respected researchers in these fields have decided that these concepts are not even helpful heuristics. it is not uncommon to hear quite explicit injunctions against their use to describe organism properties or cognitive operations. The most universal assumption is that modern computational and dynamical approaches to these subjects have made these concepts as anachronistic as phlogiston. So the idea of allowing the potentially achievable consequence characterizing a function, a reference, or an intended goal to play a causal role in our explanations of physical change has become anathema for science. A potential purpose or meaning must either be reducible to a merely physical parameter identified within the phenomenon in question, or else it must be treated as a useful fiction only allowed into discussion as a shorthand appeal to folk psychology for the sake of non-technical communication. Centuries of battling against explanations based on superstition, magic, supernatural beings, and divine purpose have trained us to be highly suspicious of any mention of such intentional and teleological properties, where things are explained as existing, quote, for the sake of something else. These phenomena can't be what they seem. Besides, assuming that they are what they seem will almost certainly lead to absurdities as problematic as dividing by zero. Chapter 12, page 12. So, despite the obvious and unquestioned role played by functions, purposes, meanings, and values in the organisation of our bodies and minds, and in the changes taking place in the world around us, our scientific theories still have to officially deny them anything but a sort of heuristic legitimacy. This has contributed to many tortured theoretical tricks and contorted rhetorical manoeuvres in order either to obscure this deep inconsistency or else to claim that it must forever remain beyond the reach of science. We will explore some of the awkward responses to this dilemma in the chapters that follow. More serious, however, is the way that this has divided the natural sciences from the human sciences, and both from the humanities. In the process, it has also alienated the world of scientific knowledge from the world of human experience and values. If the most fundamental features of human experience are considered somehow illusory and irrelevant to the physical goings-on of the world, then we, along with our aspirations and values, are efficiently rendered unreal as well. No wonder the all-perverse success of the sciences in the last century has been paralleled by a rebirth of fundamentalist faith and a deep distrust of the secular determination of human values. The inability to integrate these many species of absence-based causality into our scientific methodologies has not just seriously handicapped us, it has effectively left a vast fraction of the world orphaned from these theories that are presumably supposed to apply to everything. The very care that has been necessary to systematically exclude these sorts of explanations from undermining our causal analysis of physical, chemical, and biological phenomena has also stymied our efforts to penetrate beyond the descriptive surface of the phenomena of life and mind. Indeed, what might be described as the two most challenging scientific mysteries of the age, explaining the origin of life and explaining the nature of conscious experience. Both are held hostage by this presumed incompatibility. Recognizing this contemporary parallel to the unwitting self-imposed handicap that limited the mathematics of the Middle Ages is, I believe, a first step towards removing this impasse. It is time that we learned how to integrate the phenomena that define our very existence into the realm of the physical and biological sciences. Of course, it is not enough to merely recognize this analogous situation.